Fracking and other kinds of oil and gas development may be coming to the Wayne National Forest in the near future. Our Chase Campbell has more.
The Bureau of Land Management is opening up leasing and applications for oil and gas development on 40,000 acres of Wayne National Forest's Marietta unit in Washington, Morgan, and Noble counties. The announcement comes as the result of a recent environmental assessment of potential impacts of oil and gas leasing, which found there would be no significant impact. This announcement in and of itself doesn't allow any fracking or other kinds of oil and gas activity, as Bureau of Land Management District Manager Pamela Mathis explains.
No land is going to be moved, dug, or touched at this level. It's just saying, is oil and gas permittable at this time using this analysis? So it's a high-level environmental planning document.
Companies still have to get permits to begin fracking and other oil and gas development in the forest. Mathis said that permitting process considers each application on a case-by-case basis under the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, which Mathis said is a way to ensure any habitat loss, pollution, or other negative impacts of oil and gas activity in the forest are minimized.
When we do the NEPA analysis, one of the first things that we consider is if a proponent wants to take action on federal land in a specific location, can we avoid something that is very important there? Can we minimize the impact?
In some cases, that permitting process may not be as stringent, thanks to recent changes following President Donald Trump's declaration of a national energy emergency. The Department of the Interior announced new emergency permitting procedures that greatly reduced the time required to prepare environmental assessments or environmental impact statements on proposed energy projects that meet the DOI's criteria for emergency coverage. Mathis declined to comment on any potential impact of these changes to the permitting process. A spokesperson for the Department of the Interior noted that the department, quote, can deny emergency coverage to a project if it is deficient, for example, in adequately protecting certain aspects of the environment, unquote. Eric Engel, chair of the environmental advocacy group MOV Climate Action, said he was disappointed by the Bureau of Land Management's decision to allow oil and gas development in Wayne National Forest.
Fracking is a clean water nightmare. Oil and gas development in general is a clean air nightmare. And so really this is about, environmental safety and health, and just really trying to avoid the worst of the global climate crisis. And this is just another contribution to that.
He said he's also concerned by the laxer permitting procedures the DOI is implementing.
We need extensive scientific studies, extensive scientific research that goes into these, studying the environmental impacts of these industry moves. So whether it's fossil fuels or related industries or even clean energy, we need extensive studies into how these things will impact our livelihoods, our health, our lived environment, and before these things are permitted, no matter how long that takes.
The new permitting procedures also decrease the amount of time required for public comment on energy projects on public lands that meet the emergency criteria. For projects that are deemed unlikely to have significant environmental impacts, the Department of the Interior can forego public comments entirely. Chase Campbell, WTAP News.